Good morning. I'm going to find the light here. Thank you all for being here for the opening session this morning. I appreciate you getting out of bed, being here on a chilly morning, and such a warm welcome. And thank you to the library staff here who's been so welcoming. And I'm just thrilled to be here, but I can't help but notice I'm under a banner that says Southern Voices. And I grew up in Maine. So you may be wondering who let this Yankee in. But just to give you my bona fides for a moment, my grandmother is from Birmingham. And yet this is my first time to Alabama. Can you believe it? So I'm so excited to be here. In fact, I hope she's smiling down now, because this is a woman who signed every birthday card, every Christmas card I've ever received to my Yankee grandson from his rebel grandmother. So I hope she's smiling down today. It is as I said, a real joy to be here. I'm coming up on, I think next week will mark 10 years since I sold my first book, Lily and the Octopus. So this is, it's been such an incredible journey. And it's one thing that I love about publishing, and I don't know if we have other writers in the audience or even aspiring writers, but publishing is one of those industries that values life experience. I think of some of the biggest publishing successes in the past 10 years. Did anyone here read Lessons in Chemistry, right? Bonnie Garmus, a debut novelist in her early 60s. We can think of the Crawdads book, a debut novelist at 70. I was in my 40s already when I sold my first book, and it was something I always thought I was going to be a writer as a young person. I remember writing short stories, and my dad, who sold insurance, would take them into his office and run off multiple copies and bring them home for me to give to cousins and friends and whatnot. And I remember having this light bulb moment in second grade thinking, wait, there can be more than one copy of something I write? So I think a little publishing tyrant was born in that moment. And I think, in some regard, I was always destined or to move into writing. I like Julia Quinn. How many people were here for Julia last night? Julia Quinn, right? Wasn't that great? I was also a library kid. Well, that may be the first lie I tell you. I was a library kid, but it was in part because the library in my hometown was situated across the street from another institution, Red's Dairy Freeze. And my parents would drop my sister and I off at the library for the summer reading program. I was also partial to the reading program, no offense, at Pizza Hut. Because if you read so many books, you got a personal pizza. But Red's Dairy Freeze was a big enough draw that in the summer, my mother would drop my sister and I off at the library for the day. And we were entrusted with a little bit of spending money, and after the program was over, we were allowed to go across the street, which was a big responsibility because it was a perilous five-way intersection, and I felt so grown up. And we had a great summer. But one day, my sister realized she had somehow during the day at the library lost the money that she was entrusted with. And she saw it, my responsibility as her older brother, to share my money with her, so that we could both get a smaller treat. I, however, did not see it that way at all. I think my words were, "Sucks to be you." And we argued back and forth. And the children's librarian, I remember her name to this day, Mrs. Brado. And this is because of the impact she had on my life, not just for this, but she opened her purse and gave my sister, the amount of money at which she lost. And we both went on our merry way to Red's Dairy Freeze. Red, who had long gone white since then, was known for serving a generous scoop. And we were, thrilled. And on the drive home, we told my mother what great fortune we'd had and that the librarian had given us money. And she turned the car around in the middle of the road, marched us right back into the library and said, "We do not take money from librarians." Librarians give us enough of themselves already. And so, I was also that kid who was trying to check out a stack of books as tall as he was. And my mother and Mrs. Brado had to promise that I'd be allowed back. I didn't have to take all the books at one time. But I even then had writing aspirations. But growing up in a rural state, far away from the center of publishing, I thought maybe to be a writer, you needed to have a society name or to be born and raised in Manhattan. But lurking in the background in rural Maine was Stephen King. And so as soon as I graduated from the children's room, I beelined right over to read everything I could from Stephen King. We're talking a lot about banning books and what books are appropriate for young readers. I probably should not have been reading everything, at 11 or 12 years old that Stephen King wrote, but it made me a voracious reader for life, and then also eventually a writer myself. And now when I go home and do events in Maine, and my family thinks I'm kind of a big deal, I have to remind them I'm not even the most famous writer from Maine named Stephen. I started writing. I actually went to film school in Boston, and I thought I might have become a screenwriter. And it was because I think, I work in this space of the sort of overlap of grief and humor. And it was because, in large part, movies that were my favorite, and I credit my mother for introducing me to a lot of them. Movies like Terms of Endearment, Steel Magnolias, Beaches. These movies that my mom made me watch, and I was like, oh, these are my favorite comedies. And they're like, oh, you mean the one where the daughter dies, or the mother dies, or the best friend dies? And I was like, oh, yeah. But I didn't see them that way, I think it's Dolly Parton's character in Steel Magnolias who says, my favorite emotion is laughter through tears. And I sort of always feel that way, too, that humor has been such a guiding force and a survival mechanism, a way through difficult times. And somehow I picked up that sort of language of humor to talk about difficult subjects. If you know anything about the movie industry, though, the screenwriter is often very sort of low on the totem pole, right? It is a director's medium, and you're always waiting for a producer, a financier, an actor, all these levels of yes you have to clear in order to get your movie made. A screenplay by itself is, a blueprint, maybe. And for years of trying to break into screenwriting, I had these many screenplays, but it's not like I could give them like I did as a kid to family and friends. It doesn't feel like a complete reading experience. And so when I had my idea for my first novel, it was such a personal idea to me. I mentioned it was about the loss of my dog. Being a writer is a very sedentary experience. It's also a very solitary experience. And I didn't realize how much I'd come to rely on the company of this dog, not just for companionship, but to get me out of the chair every once in a while and move. That's so important to the writing process as well. So I was sort of adrift when she passed. And she had this brain tumor, which sort of resulted in a lump on her head like a golf ball. And I don't know why, but in writing about it, I changed that to an octopus. Because I think inherently what I was writing about was attachment and how difficult it can be to let go. And having something, this metaphor that had a tentacular, is that a word? Any reference librarians here? Hold on her, it made sense to me. A little weird, but it made sense to me, but I sort of just went with it. And I think I finished writing that book, and I was proud of it as a piece of writing, but I thought, this is a little weird little story. I'm not sure if it's going to go anywhere. And indeed, I tried calling New York publishing agents the way Julia was talking about last night. I got the Writers Marketplace. I looked up agents who handles adult fiction that might be, who sold a book about a dog in the past. And if you want to hear absolute silence on the other end of a telephone line, call New York publishing agents and say, would you like to read a book about my dog with an octopus stuck to its head? Because that's how I pictured it, like a little birthday party hat. You don't get very far. So I said, I got to try another tact. So I called another agent. I said, I have this book. It's kind of like a cross between Joe Didion's Year of Magical Thinking and Moby Dick. That did not get me an agent either. So I thought, well, this is something significant. I am proud of it. And I got very far down the road of thinking I was going to self-publish this again, right, as a kid. Here's copies I can give to families and friends. And self-publishing is a wonderful tool for writers, but it does run the gamut. There's very professional self-published things, the things that get sometimes picked up by a traditional publisher. There's also very sort of amateurish self-published books, riddled with spelling and grammatical mistakes and whatnot. And I knew I wanted mine to be more on the professional end. So I hired a freelance editor to work with me on getting it as polished as possible. And she read it one time and she said, yeah, I don't think you should self-publish this. And she used her contacts to help me get it in the door at Simon & Schuster. And I got a call saying, okay, you need to find an agent. And it turns out, when you have an offer for publication, they do take your phone calls at agents and at agencies. And I kind of got to choose, which was really fantastic. So I was completely surprised, and that book came out when I just turned 45 when that book came out. And so I finally felt like I was off to the races in this sort of career that I've been struggling to break into for 20 plus years, or longer if we count since second grade. It was a book that did tremendously well. It sold in, I think, 20 countries. It was translated in 20 countries, 20 languages. Despite my frustration with my screenwriting career, and when writing this book, I broke every screenwriting rule I could think of. Screenplays are very external, right? It's a dialogue, action, things you can see on the screen. This book was very internal. It was in one character's imagination. It had a talking dog and an octopus and a big battle at sea, like literally everything I could think a producer would say, well, we're not doing that. I'm not paying for that, or that's not even possible. I had put these all in the book, thinking, no one will ever make this into a movie. And they haven't yet, but Amazon did buy the movie rights, which I was thrilled with. And they said, you're the screenwriter, would you like to? And I was like, no, it's like the Pottery Barn rule. I broke it, but I don't want to buy it. I don't want to be the one. I'm not the best person to adapt this. And so they're still trying to find the right person to adapt it. But I had all this success, and I thought, wow, I was really feeling on top of the world. And I wrote my follow-up book, The Editor, and I had pitched the idea to my publisher, and I was very excited about it. They were excited about it. I turned in the book, and they passed. Which was a crushing blow. And I think their point of view was they sort of wanted another dog-themed book. And, which is fair. I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but we all know authors who have great careers, far more successful than mine, by writing a slightly different version of the same book again and again and again and again. And, I'd waited so long to break in. That's not how I pictured my career. And I was naive enough to think that I hadn't written a dog book. I didn't think of it like Marley and Me, for instance. It was a book about grief. And so I had to have a moment where I thought, okay, if I'd asked anyone's opinion, if it was a good idea to write about a dog and an octopus, no one would have said that was a good idea. So, I had to take a chance on myself again, and I rolled the dice, and I left my publisher, and I was pretty quickly scooped up by a division of Random House, Putnam, where I am today, which was a great sort of lesson, again, in believing in yourself and your own artistic vision and work, not only for a book, but for a career. That book, as mentioned, was about a young writer in early 1990s New York who gets his big break when his book about a sort of inspired by his family, a book about his mother, is picked up by the idealized version of American motherhood in the former Mrs. Kennedy, Jacqueline Onassis, who, for those of you who don't remember, a lot of people here I'm sure do, kids, they don't know this, had a brilliant 15-year career in book publishing after the death of her second husband. And she had sublimated so much of her life to these two marriages that what she really wanted to do when she was out from under them was to go to work. First at Viking Press and then at Doubleday, where she was for the bulk of her career. And I thought this is one of the most fascinating things about this woman, and it's not even among the top 5 things that she's known for. And so my idea was inspired by something that I had written in Lily and the Octopus about my own mother. Again, it has the words "a novel" on the front, but it was rather autobiographical. I threw in an octopus. That helped give me cover, say, no, it's a novel. But I had written something about my own mother, which I thought was really beautiful, but it was honest. It was very real, and we had to have a conversation about that after it happened. And so, I was looking for a way to write about what had happened to me in sort of writing and publishing Lily and the Octopus. And the events of that book were not interesting enough. The events of my actual life were not interesting enough to put into a novel. But, I thought, okay, the young writer caught between his mother and, Jacqueline Onassis, rock, hard place, was very interesting. And I have a real sort of soft spot for that book. It's something I'm tremendously proud of. Again, a novel, because I get so many questions. What was it like to work with Mrs. Onassis? And I'm like, well, she tragically passed away way too young. So I didn't actually get a chance to work with her, but did an incredible amount of research for that book, which is a real joy. Julia was talking about some of the research she does last night, like to be able to talk to authors that she worked with, to be able to talk to people who are now in very senior positions in book publishing because they worked with her as young people coming up in the early 90s. To be able to read the books that she had edited, to try to sort of forensically recreate what was on her desk at the time, what ideas were at the forefront of her mind, what subjects she was most interested in. Getting the auction catalog of her items after she passed, to see the furniture, see that like all this was a real sort of deep dive and a joy to do. There's the wonderful stories about her because she did have a very sly sense of humor. That whispery voice that we remember her for. That she was flying with another publishing executive when I think they were taking a commuter flight from New York to D.C. and they got on the plane last, and of course all eyes are on her as she boards the plane. And she turned to the gentleman she was with and she said, "Look, Jim, everybody knows you." Which I thought was great. She was doing a book on Egyptian art, and they were in a big conference room pitching cover ideas. And someone that she worked with had told me they had this. She wanted this one statue on the cover, but they were in, this other one. The statue that had kind of like a pointed head. And they said, no, because at the time there was the big Saturday Night Live sketch, the cone heads, right? And the publisher didn't want that. They said, I don't like this image. And they said, why not? And she turned to the young person next, why don't they like this image? And they said, well, it looks too much like a cone head. And she was like, mm-hmm. And then she turned later and she's like, what is a cone head? Which I thought was very funny. but that joy was a real book was a real joy to work on, and if anybody wanted to sort of check that out, I'd be honored to have you read that. When I was done writing that book, coincidentally, my brother had come to visit me in Palm Springs, where I live, brought his two boys, who were ages 3 and 5 at the time. He is an attorney in Boston. He was here for 24 hours. They were going to be here for the week. He was here for 24 hours. He got a call saying, I need to be in court on Monday morning on behalf of one of his clients. And he left me with his two boys, ages 3 and 5 at the time, which I do not have children. I have dogs. I've since had a puppy, which is like actually worse than the 3 and the 5-year-old. But I was sort of left flailing that week. I took them all over. I took them to the zoo. I didn't even know we had a zoo. I took them to the zoo. There is in the cheetah. Wait, what is the one that runs really fast? Is it cheetah? Cheetah. There's a cheetah enclosure, and this is the desert, so they have all these sort of desert animals. There's a meatball launcher, something called the meatball launcher, which throws a meatball all the way across, and then the cheetah can pick up full speed, 60 miles an hour or whatever, to go get the meatball. And I'm showing these boys this, and of course they were sad because their dad had left, and they were excited about, as excited about spending the week with him because he works a lot as they were for me. And I'm like, I have a swimming pool. They were sort of ho-hum about this meatball launcher. What they really wanted to see was a road runner, which the cartoons lead you to believe are like this tall. They're not. They're like desert pigeons. And I was like, well, if you want to see a road runner, I could have just brought you to the Chipotle parking lot, because they're everywhere. And anyway, I'd been flailing that week, and I'd been posting it on Instagram, our little adventures and stuff, and my editor had been following along, and she said, I can't help notice you failing spectacularly this week. Maybe there's something to write about there. And because I had been adrift after my first book, to have an editor come to me and say, like, I think this is where, your career should go. And I had always loved the anti-Mame novels from the 1950s. Has anybody read the Patrick Dennis novels? So funny to me. But, and I long-standing fascination with sort of the magical caregiver genre in general. I think back to, again, the movies my mom inspired me to watch. Mary Poppins. That woman tied me to a chair to watch a movie about a singing nun who goes to care for 7 children who'd lost their mother. And I was, squirming, I do not want to watch this, I do not want to watch this, I do not want to watch this. I press play. And so I thought, maybe there's room to sort of create a modern entry into this genre. And I was also very fascinated with the idea of sort of mid-century American writers, queer writers, closeted at the time writers because they had to be, who wrote these sort of larger-than-life women, perhaps, as stand-ins for gay men who they were not allowed to openly write about at the time, or there wouldn't have been an audience for it in the same way. So, that was the idea for the Guncle. Because life doesn't stop while you're writing a book, and it can take a year plus to work on your book, there was another confluence of events. I lost my best friend from college to breast cancer, and she left behind a 6-year-old son. And so in the Mame novels and in the Rosalind Russell did a Broadway play and then a movie, and then it was a Broadway musical with Angela Lansbury and a very bizarre movie musical with Lucille Ball. She sends her ward off to boarding school. And it sort of sidestepped the issue of grief in favor of the comedy and the hijinks. And suddenly I felt tasked with, well, okay, what is the responsibility of, a greater community around a child to step in and remind that kid how much he was fiercely loved. And the grief portion of it, I didn't want to shirk that. I didn't want to work around that. And so The Uncle's very much a book about grief and grieving again, even though it has this fun, bright cover, in this bright yellow, and it looks like a lot of fun. I always think of that as the cover, spoiler alert, is the spoonful of sugar, right, that helps the medicine go down. I'm, very proud of that book, and the one thing that an author has absolutely no control over is the state of the world when their book is released. And to the extent that that book is about a character who's been self-isolating in grief, finding his way back to the light when these children enter his life. And it came out in May of 2021, at a time when we were all emerging from a dark year. And vaccines were first available. We were all coming out, and it seemed like things were going to get better again. It was sort of a book in a moment that just kind of worked in ways that I could never have imagined. And I think it's probably what people know me best for. And I'm happy that's the case. The book went on to, as you mentioned, win the Thurber Prize for American Humor, which some of my favorite writers, David Sedaris, oh my God, I'm blanking on a name now, Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. James McBride. Patricia Lockwood, writers that I have long admired have won this award, and I was just, it's the cliche, right? It's an honor just to be nominated. So I was going to go. I was going to go to the award ceremony. I invited my mother to come with me, and I picked her up at the airport. She flew in from Maine. I was flying from California. I met her at the airport. She said, "Well, I've read all the finalists, and I know who's going to win." Not you. Which I love telling that story because it was just a motherly protection in a way. Don't get your hopes up too much. We are still this sort of weirdos from Maine who it's fun that you've kind of got your foot in the door, but this is, just couldn't quite picture it happening and didn't want me to be crushed with disappointment. There was a cocktail reception before the award ceremony, and people kept running up to me and telling me, like, "Wow, we love your mom. I wish your mom was my mom." I was like, "That's because she's telling you you're going to win." There's a very sweet photo I have that my husband took after they called my name, and I was up on stage, so I didn't see this, but she is texting in the audience. I was like, first of all, don't text in the audience, but it just said, it's in all caps, and I don't know if it's because her eyesight is bad now or she was that excited, but it just said, "He won!" exclamation mark, and she sent it to my brothers and sisters and whatnot. It's a very sweet, special memory. But it was a fun night, and I bought this tuxedo, and I was having a good time. And all evening, people were coming up to me also and saying, "God, I wish I could wear something like that." And when someone says that to you the 9th or 10th time, you start to think, I'm not sure this is a compliment. Because I was like, oh, it's really easy. You put your leg in one fabric tube and then the other fabric tube, and I was like, it's easy. Which is how I ended up on the Today Show wearing a bright yellow suit. With my next novel, The Celebrants, which was a Read with Jenna book club pick. They don't, we all follow these big celebrity book clubs, right? Reese and Jenna and Mother Oprah. They've done fantastic things for the publishing industry and driving book sales, but they're a big, big secret, When you are a pick, you're not allowed to tell anybody. I did tell my mom and a few close people, but you're really not allowed to tell anybody. And there's this whole industry now of people trying to suss out what the book club picks are going to be. There's these blogs and stuff online that say, "Do you like peanut butter? Because you might like this book, wink, wink, Reese's." But I knew I was going to be on the Today Show, so I thought, I don't want to repeat this sort of Thurber Prize suit debacle. And so I'm going to find just the right suit. I'm going to find just the right suit. And for some reason, I bought this yellow suit, and I had it in my head oh, it's the Today Show. It's like Good Morning, it's like the yellow. It's like the sun coming out. It's like, and the book gets announced, and it's a big deal, and it became my first New York Times bestseller, and it really did fantastic things for my career. And Jenna was great fun to work with. She's exactly in real life as you see her on TV. And I'm on book tour for a month, sort of working my way east toward New York, where I'm going to be at the end, because they announced at the beginning of the month, you're on at the end of the month to discuss it. And I had this yellow suit, and I pulled it out, and each city, I would try it on and be like, I don't know, because I began to think the only person I could remember wearing a yellow suit was Curious George's friend. And I thought, I'm either going to have to commit and get a hat, or Al Roker is going to look at me and be like, I think that man lost his monkey. Anyway, it's all on YouTube. You can see me embarrass myself in a yellow suit. But that was great fun. But the idea for the Celebrants came from, I was talking to somebody about this last night, early in the pandemic, when we thought, oh, this will be cute. It'll be 3 weeks. I get to stay at home. And watch Netflix, right? I was looking for one of those movies that my mom had introduced me to that, was familiar, but I hadn't seen it in a long time, but it might be a comfort watch. And I settled on The Big Chill. Anybody remember this movie, right? I remember for its great Motown soundtrack, but it's a story about college friends getting back together to reunite upon the death of one of their own. For the first time. And it's all about middle age and what's the back half of our lives going to look like and time slipping away. And I'm watching this movie, and all the actors and all the characters are 35 years old. And as someone who was turning 50 that year, I did not find that comforting at all. And so I sort of wanted, I was inspired by this, this group of college friends, and again, still processing the loss of my friend from college. And so I wanted to update this story to characters in their 50s, a more modern understanding of what middle age is and what some of the stresses of middle age are. But the importance of found family, which is a theme that has run through particularly queer stories for a long time. A lot of people worried about being rejected from their own families, moved to big cities, formed these incredible found families. And so a book about friendship was truly something that I feel like I was destined to write. But I always try to infuse my work with joy. And The Celebrants is, none of my stories are particularly, I don't think of them as just queer stories. There's a lot of straight people in them, which is great. But I do think about the books that were available to me when I was young and thinking about coming out for the first time, and they were largely stories that were reflective of their time. And so they're stories about lonely existences, lives lived in the shadows, and tragically, often lives cut short. And I have found for me, and it's just being fortunate enough to be born at a time when things have changed for the better, not for every queer person, certainly right now, not for trans people. But life has been filled with community, rather joyous, and comparatively long, although the years are going by faster and faster. And so I always want to work that sort of humor and joy and community into all of my stories, because I think about a young closeted person coming out now, and I want them to have stories that reflect the true joy that they can find in their lives. And The Guncle Abroad, which just came out this year, a lot of people assume that Patrick, the main character from The Guncle, was a fun character to write. And yeah, that's true. But spoiler alert, there's a lot of Patrick right here. He's younger than I am. He's better looking than I am. But there's a lot of, his sense of humor is right here. I can hang out with Patrick anytime I want to. But it was truly the kids at the heart of The Guncle. The Guncle's a story where, this is not a spoiler because it's set up on page 1. They've gone to spend the summer with their Uncle Patrick. At the end of that summer, they're going home. Their mother has passed away. They're with their uncle for the summer, but they're going to go home at the end of that summer to a house where their mother is no longer there. And it was a happy enough ending for the first book, but my mind kept turning back to the kids, How are they? I really felt a responsibility to find out, are the kids okay? So it was the first time attempting a sequel, but the sequel to the Auntie Mame novel was a book called Around the World with Auntie Mame. And I sort of knew if I'm going to revisit these characters, we're going to go on a trip. We're going to go abroad. And that has been great fun for me as well. So I would love to open this up to questions, any questions you may have about anything. Other authors appearing later. What's for lunch? You're on your own. I have a hard time seeing, so somebody raise your...
Over here on the left.
Yes.
So my family's from Maine.
Mm-hmm.
Holt, way up.
Way up there.
We like to keep it weird. So this is going to be a weird question.
Okay.
Has Lily come back to visit you?
Lily is right here. So I get to see her every day. She's chasing her red ball forever. Red ball is a big character in the story. Yeah, it is truly. I know it's a book that we all know what happens in dog books, right? Although I have a book coming out at the end of the year called The Dogs of Venice. Nothing bad happens to the dog. I just say that right. I just want to put this on the cover. The book should just be called Nothing Bad Happens to the Dog. I could sell a lot of copies that way. But the idea that and she was a dachshund, she was about 16 pounds. The idea that this incredible life force, has changed my life so tremendously, I find great comfort. I don't know that she visits me every day, but what I find great comfort is the idea that she is still out there, meeting new friends. Every time somebody picks up the book. And it is truly one of my favorite things about people who love animals. Because we all know what the deal is, right? They don't live as long as we do. They don't live nearly long enough. But we adopt them. We love them fully. They don't let you keep them at an arm's length. And we lose them and we grieve them. And so many of us, when the time is right. For some people, it's the next day. For other people, it's years later. But so many of us get to the end of the line and sign up to do it all over again because it is so worth it, and invaluable lessons that she has taught me that I still hold dear to this day. So I don't know if she visits me every day, but she does visit. But I do love the idea that she's out there on this sort of grand adventure, meeting new people. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Yes.
In the Guncle, what inspired you for the dad to go through what, I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but what inspired you to have the dad face that when the kids were also facing the death of their mom?
Yeah, so in the book, again, this is all sort of the premise of the book. It doesn't spoil or anything. In the Guncle, the kids end up with their uncle for the summer because their mom has passed away, and their dad is checking into rehab because he has developed a drug problem through sort of his anticipatory grief of losing his wife. Plot device. I don't know. Well, why doesn't the dad just take the kids? I needed to get them to the uncle. But so many of us are struggling with grief and struggling in different ways. And I wanted to sort of represent that. Particularly after the past couple years. We may not all have lost a person the way that character has, but we've certainly lost time, and we've lost the ability to be together And I think, and I was writing that, sort of around the time of the pandemic and a time when I was feeling very sort of isolated. My husband was also going through cancer treatment at that time. He's healthy now, but we had to really shut out the world. It's hard to go through chemotherapy during a pandemic. And so, people are struggling, and I wanted to sort of be honest about that. And I think, the pandemic's going to have long-reaching impact that I don't think we know yet. I don't think we know the effects of children having missed kindergarten, say, or, kids not having formative experiences like prom or graduation or whatnot, or even the elderly people, or people who had to say goodbye to family members and not be able to see them. But anyway, God, I do write jokes, I swear. But yeah, I was writing at a time when I think a lot of people were struggling, and I just sort of wanted to reflect some of that struggle in an honest way. Thank you. Yes?
If you could give advice to your younger creative self who is struggling for a really long time, what would you have told them?
Yeah, advice for my younger creative self. I would have said, my entire life I've been writing. But people would ask me, what do you do? And I had a career, I had a long time I was supporting myself with being a paralegal. I had all these odd jobs through my time trying to break through as writing. And people would ask me, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I'm a paralegal, but I dabble in some writing, And I would always say almost like an apology, And I would want to tell myself, no, if you write, you're a writer. If you act, you're an actor. If you perform music, you're a musician. It doesn't matter how you make your income. You are that creative soul. And I wish I had the courage to say it more loudly and proudly, and that's what I would encourage others to do. Because I think it attracts opportunity into your life when you are able to say that. Yeah. In the back, yeah.
What does your marketing program look like? How much does your publisher do for you when you've got a new book coming out, and how much of it is your own devising of here's the marketing strategy? And as far as the financial, do you pay for most of the marketing? Do they? Can you tell us, did they at first? Do you now?
Yeah. So how does marketing publicity work? I have a publicist at my publisher. I have also paid for a private publicist at times. It's very expensive, and I don't know, there's a lot of duplication of efforts and people trying to take credit for things, and so I'm never really clear whether that investment was worth it. It is very hard. There are a lot of books that come every year, a lot of books. And so when I have my publicist at my publisher, I have their attention for a small window, right? And then they got to move on to the next book. And so I'm like, well, wait, what? We're just building something here. Why can't we? And so it's always every author thinks the publisher should be doing more. I'm sure, and there's a small percentage of, it's too bad because the authors who get a big advance or a big splashy deal often will get a big publicity campaign because the publisher has to earn back their money, right? And it's these mid-list books or smaller titles that really could use the publicity because they're not necessarily destined to do as well. They're not going to get their front of store placement in a bookstore or all sorts of things like that. And so, it is difficult. It's difficult to get noticed. And publishing is also a very reactive industry. They want that, I'm sorry to say that they know what worked the last time and they kind of want to do that again. And so, I made all these little silly videos for the Gunkel. And when the Celebrants came out, they were like, well, you could do some of your silly videos. And I'm like, well, I don't think that really works for this book. And so it's hard. It's hard to find that balance. And so they'll be like, you want to be on TikTok? And I was like, no, I do not want to be. I am 50 years old. I do not need to be on TikTok. And so it's hard because the things that really work, from some of these viral marketing, something like TikTok, is because it's reader driven, right? It's authentic love for a book that bubbles up to the top. It's not top down. It's not something the author or the publisher can really force on people and expect that same kind of authentic reaction. So it's difficult. I am on Instagram. I left Twitter, cesspool. But I am on Instagram a lot, and there's an incredible Bookstagram community on there, which is really they found the Gunkel and helped that book break through, and I'm incredibly grateful to some of those people who run those accounts, and because it's the version of, it's still like there's no ad you can buy for a book. There's no, I can go out on tour. It's fun to meet readers. It's fun, but the number one way people, I think particularly fiction, discover a new book is when someone that they trust puts it can be your librarian, right? Puts a book in your hand and says, you've got to read this, right? And so the Bookstagram and Book Talk, it's just a larger sort of version of that. You follow these accounts where you learn to trust their taste, and when they are, touting a book, you might want to take notice. So, it's tough. It's tough, for the fight for eyeballs, and it only gets harder as our brains are rewired to think of shorter and shorter experience hits, little videos, 30-second pieces. I'm afraid for the future of reading, both for pleasure but long-form reading, particularly. And I'm guilty sometimes. A book 700 pages. Oh my God. Yeah. Do we have time for one more? Yes.
Thank you for coming. You are delightful. And may I have your yellow shoes? Now, I have not read any of your books yet. Which one should I start with?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so for readers who are new to, well, first of all, the comment was, I am a delight. I don't know if anyone's transcribing this, but I just want to make sure that goes in the, in the notes. If you are new to me, a book, well, the one that everybody loves the most is the Gunkel. I love them all. I can't pick it's like having a favorite child. But I really have a soft spot for the editor, and I really adore the celebrants too. But the Gunkel books are what people know me the most for. If you want to laugh the most, that's probably where to start.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Up there? Yes. What am I reading now? Oh, I'm reading God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I brought it on the plane. I'm in a fortunate position where I'm reading things that are coming out 6 months, a year from now. But I also try to read fun, because I also want to know who else is funny. And I just read Sandwich by Catherine Newman. Has anybody read this? Yeah. It's so funny. And that is what I love about humor that comes from real honesty, right? That comes from character. That is about a menopausal woman. And the way that she is so funny sucks you right in. And I'm like, I completely understand this character, even though, I'm not menopausal, but I have a weird white eyebrow hair that comes in like every morning. I'm like, where does this come from? But that's a drop in the bucket compared to menopause. But anyway, I loved Sandwich. I love Sandwich, and a really interesting look at the sandwich generation too. Yeah.
Author again? The author of that?
Catherine Newman. Catherine with a C, I think. All right, yes?
What is your writing system or your routine?
I have an office for the very first time. In fact, I had custom bookshelves and cabinets made for a room in my house. Just moved into a new house last year. I have an office now. I used to be like a cat. I would just take my laptop and follow the sun around the house all day. But I'm so excited for this office, mostly because all last week I was setting up the office, which is wonderful procrastination for a writer. So procrastination is a big part of, like, oh no, we're out of almond milk. I should go to the store for 9 hours. Which is why I do try to write in the morning, because the day will throw everything at you, not to write. And so if I can get some done in the morning, I also go back to work oftentimes late at night. And I say late, but I mean 8:30, 9 o'clock. Late is a relative term as you get older. But no one's trying to reach me, no phone call, no incoming email, no nothing, the quiet of evenings. And it just depends. It switches around a little bit too. When I have a book coming out and I have responsibilities from the publisher, publicity, et cetera, I'm in California, my publisher's in New York, so I know I have to wait till after kind of like 2 o'clock before the email, my time is the end of the day in New York, before I know the emails kind of quiet down a little bit and I can focus on writing. But it's difficult, and I'm married to another writer too, and so that presents its own challenges. It's a great wealth of resources, because I can, ask, hey, how do you? And it's also good to have someone else who understands the process, because sometimes it's hard to turn off just because it's dinner time. Sometimes you're very in your head trying to figure something out. So if I'm quiet or whatever, I'm never quiet. That's the next lie. But if I seem distracted, he can understand why. But two, it's you really do have to learn how to give each other notes. If he brings me something to read, I'm like, okay, is he asking me as a spouse? In which case, I want to be supportive and effusive, or is he asking me as another writer or as an editor? It does not work when I try to punch up his jokes. That's not good, and I have to pull out, I have an award. Yeah. Yeah, but if we get divorced, that'll be why, because I've tried to punch up one too many jokes. Yeah. All right. Yes.
I was just curious about Audible, what your experience was like with Audible.
Oh, yeah. So has anybody listened? If anybody listened to the Gunkel or the Celebrants, I narrated those audiobooks myself, which is I had a wonderful actor, Michael Urie, narrate my first couple audiobooks, and then I had the idea with the Gunkel, and it was because the jokes were so important to me. I heard, when you're writing a book, it's yours and yours alone for a very long period of time. And when an actor reads it for an audiobook, and oh, by the way, this is an actor's job, they should interpret the text, but they may go up when I get thinking, it's jarring to hear it in someone else's voice. But so I thought, the jokes were such, they could be too broad, they could be delivered too, I just thought it needed to be done just the right way. So I said, I would like to narrate this. And my publisher said, not a good idea. And they made me audition. And I had to put myself on tape. I'm 1,000 years old. Tape. There's no tape anymore. Digital. I had to record myself on my phone, reading my own book, send it in to the publisher, and then wait, I hope I get the part. But that was a lot of fun. But for the Gunkel particularly, I thought I was so brilliant on paper. Sorry, I'm rambling on now. Are we running out of time? Okay. I thought I was so brilliant on paper because there were the two kids, and I was like, I'm going to give one of them a lisp. Because then I don't have to tag every piece of dialogue. I don't have to write he said, she said, Maisie said, Grant said. It'll be clear which child is talking. Until it became time to narrate the audiobook. And I was like, son of a bitch! Who wrote this? So, Gunkel Abroad. Again, no spoiler, it's right on page 1. Grant outgrows his lisp. I am a genius. And I get in the recording booth, and I realize all the new characters are Italian. So it's a lot of me going, Patrick, why are you the Gunkel? No, I have a great time doing it. They rent me. There's a recording studio right in Palm Springs that they rent me. Although the first thing you have to do is turn off the air conditioning because the microphone will pick up the hum. And if you've read The Guncle or know anything about Palm Springs, you know it's hot. And I was April, so it was like borderline when I was. But it's me as a sound engineer, and then I'm wearing headphones where there's a director from New York or LA. I forget where he is, but this disembodied voice in my. So we're going to. I'm in there, and once an hour I'd have to open the door, and be like, because it just gets so hot in there. And this audio engineer. Who is more music recorded in there than like audiobooks and stuff like that. But he wasn't used to the process. And he comes out, he's like, look at you, you're crying at your own book. It's like, I'm not crying, I'm sweating, you know? Like, may have been crying a little bit, but I didn't want to tell him that. But it's a great joy. I don't know that every author would want to undertake that, but it is, I was also saying last night too, it's interesting, you know, like some people want to read a book before they meet the author, you know, because they don't want the author's voice interfering with how they interpret it. And some people absolutely want to come see me before they read the book because they like having the idea of my cadence or whatnot when they read the book. So, you know, it's audiobooks are incredible tools, and I love that you can get them from the library. Libro FM is a great thing where you can buy audiobooks too. And support your local independent bookstore. You can choose which bookstore you want the money to go to. And it's a better way of doing it than, hate to say it, the big A word. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me.